The federal government tracks a lot of different statistics, everything from the unemployment rate to details on crime. We rely on them for honest information, but that's not always what we get. They've learned that if they publish positive information, whether or not there's any truth behind the numbers, the public is happier, complains less, and asks fewer questions. In fact, ID goes so far as to say that we now live in a world where lies have become the truth. Welcome to my channel. It's me. And today we're going to take a look at a few areas where the government lies to us every month and every year to make us think that everything is okay. Let's dive in. Figures lie. Liars figure. It turns out that the most common lie we tell ourselves as adults is to cover up the fact that we're getting worse at our jobs. Figures lie. Liars figure, said the great statistician Mark Twain, who died in 1910, which tells you how timeless his words are. We don't usually think of government statisticians as liars, but some of the numbers they produce aren't exactly honest representations of reality. First up, let's look at a number that most of us have heard of at some point in our lives, even if we don't know why it's important. Gross domestic product, or GDP, is one of the most important and well-known numbers reported by the government. It's supposed to be a measure of economic growth, a snapshot of how well the economy is doing. But because it is considered so important, it's hugely manipulated to make things look better than they are. Let's start with the basics. What is GDP? In simple terms, GDP is everything we spend on stuff. So the more stuff we buy, the higher the GDP. You might wonder why they need such a number. And the answer is that it's supposed to tell us how well the economy is doing. If GDP goes up, that's good, right? Well, yes, except when it's not. The problem with GDP is that it includes spending on things like war and natural disasters. Those aren't exactly signs of a strong economy. And yet that's what the government uses to calculate it. In 2012, for example, Hurricane Sandy caused billions of dollars in damage to homes and businesses along the eastern seaboard. Yet the government counted all of that as economic activity, boosting GDP 114 to make things worse. They also include government spending in the GDP number, which means that if the government borrows money so it can spend more, we're artificially pumping up the GDP number with borrowed money. Think how much better GDP would be if we had a $2 trillion year deficit, or $5 trillion. Now, you might be thinking, what does it matter if we borrow money to boost the economy? As long as we pay it back, then it's all good, right? Wrong. Economist Paul Krugman explains it best. Suppose that you lent me $100 and I spent it on candy. That would add $100 to the GDP. Then suppose I gave you the wrapper from the candy and asked you to exchange it for $100 cash. That wouldn't change the GDP at all. And yet, we just transferred $100 from your pocket to mine without adding anything to the total amount of economic activity. 115, but that's only the beginning. The government also adjusts GDP based on things they pretend added value to the economy, even though no transactions actually took place. For example, if you own your own home, they figure out how much rent you would be paying yourself and add that in. If you buy a $1,000 computer that has more features than the same computer last year, they add in more than $1,000 to the GDP. Chris Martinson estimates that up to 35% of GDP is made up of these hedonic adjustments. 119, if they want to goose the GDP number, they'll count additional things in the formula. In 2013, for example, they were able to boost GDP by 3% instantly by including money earned from creative works, including movies, television shows, books, theater, and music, as well as corporate research and development. 120. This kind of manipulation of the numbers can lead to some strange conclusions. For example, after the attacks of September 11, 2001, the government spent a lot of money rebuilding Lower Manhattan, which boosted the GDP. At the same time, Americans spent a lot of money on security measures like airport screenings, which also boosted GDP. So in the immediate aftermath of an attack on America, the government counted all of this as economic growth. 100. Next up is the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate is another important statistic. It tells us how many people are out of work and looking for jobs. Low unemployment means the economy is healthy, right? Maybe not. The unemployment number, which comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is very misleading. First of all, it doesn't give you an accurate sense of how many people are out of work. There are several categories in the BLS report. The most commonly reported U3 only reports on those who are unemployed and are actively looking for work. That excludes people who want a job but have given up looking, people who have part-time jobs but would prefer full-time work, and people who are working part-time because they can't find a full-time job. These people are counted as employed, not unemployed. If people have been out of work for too long because they can't find a job, we stop counting them. Does that make sense? Second, it tells you nothing about the quality of jobs or who's getting them. A high-wage manufacturing job counts the same as a job at a fast food joint. A part-time job counts as much as a full-time job. And we can tell that almost all the job gains are going to people over the age of 55. True, by the way. 121, in addition, it uses a fudge factor called the birth-death model, which adds in jobs they can't survey like new business startups, even though there are more business closures than there are startups these days. 122, the birth-death model keeps adding tens or hundreds of thousands of jobs to the report. Because the unemployment rate gets all the attention, it also gets manipulated the most. Other numbers, like the labor participation rate, a straight-up percentage of working-age people in the workforce, give a better picture of what's going on in this country. The labor participation rate in January 2016 was at 62.3%, the lowest level since 1978. 123 other lies. We could keep talking about other lies. But the problem is that if you call them out, no one listens. So I'm just going to list a few others here, and you can take it from there. Housing starts. The number of new houses being built is a key indicator of the health of the housing market. Unfortunately, it's pretty easy to manipulate. Houses under construction, but not yet finished, count as new housing starts, meaning that developers can easily boost a number. 125. We also count any building with 5 or more units as one housing start, meaning that if a developer builds a big apartment complex, they get credit for multiple starts. Consumer Price Index CPI. CPI is the number that the government uses to calculate inflation. It's supposed to represent the average change in prices paid by urban consumers for a basket of goods and services. It's calculated by comparing prices in a given month to prices in a base period. Sounds straightforward, right? Except when the government needs to make inflation look lower than it is, they do a few things. They switch out items in the CPI basket for cheaper ones. They ignore price increases on items that people buy a lot of. And they use something called hedonic regression, which discounts the price of products based on improvements in quality. For example, if a car costs more but has a bigger engine, they discount the increase in price based on the fact that you're getting a bigger engine. So while the government claims that inflation has remained low, that may not be true for you if you feel like everything's gotten more expensive. And it's not surprising that we can't trust the CPI, the agency that calculates it. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is headed by someone who believes that inflation is whatever the government decides it is. When asked about the CPI, she said, "Well, it's a political decision." 126 lies keep us in the dark. These are just a few of the ways that the government lies to us about the economy. But why? Why do they do this? Most of us want to know the truth, even if it's unpleasant. Sometimes we need to know the truth so we can take action. Imagine, for example, if the government told us that crime was actually increasing instead of decreasing. We might take steps to protect ourselves. Or, if inflation was higher than they said, we might demand that they take action to bring it down. The fact is, the government benefits from keeping us in the dark. When we don't know the truth, we're more likely to go along with whatever they're selling. We blindly trust their solutions to problems that they either created or ignored, until they became big problems. We end up giving the government more power to control our lives. Which is why I believe that it's so important to be aware of the lies that they tell us. I want to thank you for watching today's video and being part of this community. And before you go, please make sure you check out other videos on this channel, which I think you'll also enjoy.